So, if sustainable land use by 2050 depends on what happens in the near term, the next 10 to 15 years, how good does it look right now with a new government? How confident should we be that we've got in power now a coalition government capable of doing things here in England and governments in Wales and Scotland capable of doing what they need to do there? Well, here I have to be just a tiny bit skeptical. Lindis's paper, which is an admirable introduction to some of this, highlighted what she described as political blindness about landscape, not just now, but on a historical and ongoing basis. And if that is true, if that analysis holds for what we've been through up until now, I suspect it's going to be even more the case from now on. We've seen two things happen immediately. One, anything to do with the regional tier in England has been disappeared. It has just gone. Regional spatial strategies were deemed to be unhelpful to good land use planning and strategic intervention and have been swept away, together with regional development agencies, regional government offices, and a whole host of regionally constructed sources for public sector intervention in people's lives. At the same time, we've seen a scaling down of what I would call a UK dimension. I don't think Whitehall is particularly interested in what is going on now in Scotland and Wales, and is perfectly content, as long as they don't have to transfer any more powers, to let things just muddle along. And thirdly, we are on the edge of an extraordinarily punitive assault on the public sector across the whole of the UK. And I put it in those terms because it is more than just austerity for the purposes of balancing the budget. This is an outright attack on the degree to which the public sector serves people in our respective countries. So those three things, loss of a UK focus, loss of regional framing, and this assault on the public sector, must cause us all to be just a little bit nervous about our ability to deliver the decisions over the next 10 years, which would deliver genuinely sustainable land use by 2050. Am I being a little bit unfair? We do, after all, have, for the first time ever in modern history, in Whitehall, we have a minister for decentralization. This is a great complaint, of course, historical complaint, that Whitehall never cares about genuine decentralization. Well, ironically, Whitehall, in the shape of a certain Eric Pickles, really cares about decentralization. Whatever else you may say about this guy, however much you may think he's an egregiously stupid mountebank that has been swept into power off the back of God knows what populist idiocy, whatever else you may be tempted to say, trust me, he is a genuine decentralizer. A genuine decentralizer. And what that means is he's perfectly prepared to accept that there will be significant downstream costs associated with a more decentralist decision-making process, because that's the price of a genuinely decentralist constitution for England, at least. I can't really comment about Scotland and Wales in that regard. Localism for real. This is not a fiction this time round. Localism is for real. So, where does that leave us? In a constitution where localism is going to become the norm, and in which decision-making will pass down to local councils in a way that we haven't anticipated, in which local development frameworks will be reinforced by neighbourhood plans. This came in recently. Nobody quite knows the status of a neighbourhood plan. And the only bit that we will have to keep any kind of coherence, overarching that systematic decentralization, is, quotes, a national presumption in favour of sustainable development, end quotes. That's in the coalition government's programme for government. It's in the new paper on local economic power. It is often bandied around when you visit people in DCLG. Just don't ask anybody what that means, because nobody has a clue. Genuinely, nobody has a clue. So right up there we have this thing hanging in the air, a national presumption in favour of sustainable development. Nothing then This is England again, forgive me, Clive. Nothing then until you get down to local authorities with their local development frameworks, their local enterprise partnerships, their neighbourhood plans, and so on. Okay, so let's revisit this target of 15% of all our energy coming from renewable sources by 2020. And you decentralize at exactly the point where you have to start driving a coherent program to deliver that, and you get rid of the regional bodies, which were the only bit of the system in England capable of moving towards that target. With the regional spatial strategies have gone all the targets for renewable energy at the regional level in the UK, in England. Gone. There are no regional targets for renewable energy any longer in England. They went with the RSS. At the same time, and here I'm going to get into some delicate territory, you'd have to say that Pickles's populism has disturbingly NIMBYist characterizations around it. I think Pickles would be perfectly content for every single planning committee, the length and breadth of England, to turn down even more planning applications for onshore wind farms than has been the case up until now. And you will find that nervousness reflected in the onshore wind industry in the UK that cannot see how this new decentralist surge is going to create the context in which sensible planning decisions around onshore wind can be brought forward, let alone any other aspect of the renewable energy revolution, let alone grid upgrades and so on. Now, I am obviously well aware of the fact that for a very large percentage of people in the UK, the deliberate whipping up of NIMBYist tendencies around renewable energy leads them to say one thing and one thing only, which is, yippee! Stuff those wind turbines. They don't make any difference anyway, they don't contribute to energy security, they don't actually contribute much to the targets, they're just a blight on the landscape, lavatory brushes in the sky. I don't know where I'm getting these quotes from, but you know, all of that stuff. And I don't think Pickles would be at all worried if the cost of his populist instinct was that DEC and Chris Huhne suddenly found that the contribution from onshore wind to this target of 15% by 2020 was pretty nearly zero. And at what point are we going to see interventions coming forward to correct what might be a dangerously over-egging of the decentralist story? Difficult for me to talk about this. Greens, after all, almost have instilled into their genetic makeup a belief that decisions are best taken closest to the point where they have an impact. But here, I'm a bit nervous about that, as you can imagine. Neil may want to pick me up on that and tell me that CPRE is going to deliver this wonderful integrated renewable future for the UK in terms of what can be done next. So these aren't the only problems, but I'm pretty nervous about this. And from a landscape perspective, you may say that's a good thing. I am on the record as saying that I think there are many landscapes in the UK, not just in England, which have been significantly enhanced by the arrival of a wind farm. That hasn't made me popular with an awful lot of landscape aficionados and people who are passionate about landscapes in the UK, but I think we often over-romanticize about how special they might actually be. That's a little momentary spasm of controversy, but hey. So it's not just going to be renewable energy. There'll be other things, as you can imagine. It's not just in this area. I think it's in the area of farming that we'll see some astonishingly difficult decisions being taken over the next 5 to 10 years' time. Caroline Spellman at DEFRA is basically the great agricultural intensifier from way back. It's as if the whole debate about sustainable agriculture was now completely irrelevant. She's a mad enthusiast for GM. She essentially believes that this is a fantastic opportunity for UK farming as markets grow, as demand grows for all these crop types of one kind or another. She's on the record as saying this is the moment for UK farmers to be out there doing their bit to fill this demand. So in lots of different areas, I think we're in for some very rocky times indeed over the next few years. And that's why I mentioned this assault on the public sector, because for me that could prove to be one of the most damaging aspects of what this government now has in mind.